Political earthquake in Canada. Justin Trudeau has finally announced that he is stepping down. On the morning of 6th of January, the sitting Prime Minister of Canada made an unexpected press appearance at the official residence. Why? Well, to announce nothing less than his resignation, both from his position as Prime Minister and from the possibility of running for re-election in the next elections to be held later this year, in October at the latest.
I intend to resign as party leader, as Prime Minister, after the party selects its next leader through a robust, nationwide, competitive process. Last night, I asked the President of the Liberal Party to begin that process.
And he is certainly a guy who generates strong opinions. We're talking about a character who has lived for politics from a very young age. In fact, born on Christmas Day, 1971, he was the eldest son of the then 15th Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau. So, as you can imagine, from a very young age, he received a lot of media attention. And guess what? Justin became wildly popular. In 2005, he married Sophie Gregoire, a Canadian media celebrity and the daughter of a millionaire in the financial industry. They soon became known as the Canadian Kennedys. And just 2 years later, Justin did what everyone expected him to do. He finally made the leap into politics. Curiously, he did so in a constituency where he did not have an easy time, but still managed to win by just over 1,000 votes. From that moment on, there was one thing that was a constant in his political career. Whenever Trudeau's defeat was considered certain, in one way or another, he always managed to turn the tables on it. And so, in 2015, thanks to his youth, his popularity, and his promises of renewal, he finally managed to become the 23rd Prime Minister of Canada. Since then, 9 years have passed, and now his political situation is completely different, to the point, as you have seen, of being forced to hang up his hat. But why has Trudeau decided to quit before the end of his term? In what state exactly does he leave Canada? Well, VisualPolitik community, that's exactly what we're going to get into right now. Let's be clear, the Canadian Prime Minister was cornered on all fronts. Nationally, his approval rating had plunged to about 20%, meaning that nearly 8 out of 10 Canadians disapproved of his performance. Perhaps that's why the Conservative Party, the main opposition party, is far ahead in the polls, as we shall see. And to top it off, 59% of the supporters of his own political formation, the Liberal Party, were clamoring for his resignation. In fact, more than half of the voters who trusted this Prime Minister in the last elections of 2021 would give his management a fail. And of course, as you can imagine, such a dire situation has also caused a lot of trouble within his party. Don't forget that this year there are elections, and that many have their own jobs on the line, and are nervous about what is happening.
That if I'm having to fight internal battles, I cannot be the best option in that election.
But ultimately, the Prime Minister has stepped aside. Why now? Basically, because his political capital has run out. He is completely exhausted. To give you an idea, the latest polls show that with only a few months to go before the elections, voter intention for him barely exceeds 16%. And if this data were to materialize in the elections, we would be talking about nothing short of the worst result in the history of his party. And we aren't exactly talking about a new party. Take a look. Way back in the 1867 election, the Liberals received 22.7% of the vote. In the 43 federal elections since then, support for this party has only fallen below 30% on 3 occasions. In 1984, when they received 28% of the vote. In 2008, when they took 26.2% of the ballots. And in 2011, the only time, by the way, that the Liberals became the third force in Parliament, with 18.9% of the vote. Well, as you can see, the current 16% shown in the polls would be the worst result in 158 years. It's a political catastrophe that now puts even third place at risk for the Liberal Party. Of course, everything indicates that they can forget about victory. The Conservatives are almost 30 points ahead of them. VisualPolitik community, Canadians have had enough of this Prime Minister, his party, and his policies. Take a look at these data. The last polls taken before the resignation announcements showed that 46% of Canadians called for his resignation, while another 38% argued that the situation was untenable and that the Prime Minister had to call an early election as soon as he returned from his Christmas vacation. In other words, 84% of Canadians were against Justin Trudeau seeing out his term. And that is how, in the end, logically, this Prime Minister had no other choice. But the real question is, what the hell has happened to get us to this point? Well, in order to understand this whole story, we have to go all the way back to 2015, when Trudeau was first elected Prime Minister. At that time, Justin came to power with what we can qualify as a kind of strategic bicephaly. On the one hand, unlike his father, who was a very left-wing politician, he pledged to respect the economic foundations of the country. That is, not to fatten the state too much, and to bet on private initiative and the market economy. At the same time, he became one of the icons of what was known as the New Left, and that today many would qualify without hesitation as a model of woke politics. We're talking about Justin Trudeau coming to power with a political and social agenda focused on climate action, reconciliation with indigenous peoples, gender parity, feminism, euthanasia, stronger gun control, LGBT rights, and so on and so forth. That is, in fact, what made him so loved and so hated at the same time. Be that as it may, the point is that for the first few years, this Prime Minister delivered. The Trudeau Liberals introduced child benefits, cut taxes for the middle class, and legalized recreational cannabis, all while defending free trade tooth and nail on the international agenda. This was a political agenda that allowed him to win the elections again in 2019 and also in 2021, although with less and less popular support and without parliamentary majorities. So what did this politician do? Well, what all politicians typically do. Start playing the entitlement card and the extension of free welfare, among other things, it must be said, because when he lost his majority in Parliament in 2019, he had to start making pacts with the Bloc Québécois and, above all, with the New Democratic Party, a party much further to the left, which logically determined the type of policies that Trudeau could bring forward. Nevertheless, he accepted that turn of events. He is responsible for everything that happened. And this is when the problems really started. As Trudeau governments focused more on social policy, they forgot about the things that grow a country's economy. So the results started to be quite bad. Do you want an example? Well, here we have, without going any further. The case of housing. The policy of opening doors to millions of immigrants from all over the world was not accompanied by facilities to build homes. The result? Faced with a shortage of supply, prices skyrocketed. Specifically, since 2019, house prices have increased by almost 40%, making Canada one of the OECD countries with the highest house price-to-income ratio. And then to top it all off, the rate hike was the final straw. In short, bad management. Another example? The lack of control of public accounts, at least by local standards. The results have been so bad in recent years that 2024 closed like this.
Fiscal update reveals a 62 billion Canadian dollars deficit.
Let's see, it's not much. We're talking about 44 billion US dollars, a little more than 2% of GDP. It seems almost a joke compared to the huge budget gaps of the United States and many European countries. But no matter, the problem is that on the one hand, Canada has a certain aversion to debt. In fact, over on VisualPolitik, we already told you how Canada's financial system is the soundest in the world, and it is that way because Canadians are extremely cautious. On the other hand, this deficit announcement means that the budget gap is 50% higher than projected. In other words, the economy is grinding to a halt, and this is causing revenue forecasts not to be met, which is creating a mismatch in the public accounts that the government simply did not see coming. The feeling that the government has lost touch with economic reality is widespread throughout much of the country. A country, by the way, where more than 50% of citizens consider the Trudeau government's public spending to be too high. In other words, they want less spending and not more. But okay, that's still not enough. Do you want more evidence of how he finally lost it? Well, take another example. Under Trudeau's leadership, the number of public employees in the federal government expanded by approximately 43%, while the population barely grew by 17%. The problem? Well, none of what we're seeing has served to boost economic growth, which has lagged far, far behind that of its southern neighbor, the United States. And yes, this is one of those cases where a picture is worth 1,000 words. In fact, the IMF forecasts that Canada's per capita national income, which was roughly 80% that of the United States in the decade before the pandemic, will be only 70% of Uncle Sam's in 2025. This is the lowest level in decades and is what some are already coming to call the Great Divergence. This is largely due to the fact that under Trudeau, Canadian companies have invested much less than US companies. There are times when political messages and regulatory changes that seem small at first glance end up having a huge effect. Of course, at the helm of the country during all this time has been Justin Trudeau, so it's entirely logical that Canadians hold him responsible for this situation. Be that as it may, the fact is that these we have seen are just a few examples of a country that is now suffering. Firstly, with an economic crisis. Secondly, with a political crisis linked to migration. And thirdly, an increase in living costs, especially, as we have seen, in housing prices. And that is hitting the standard of living of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of Canadians very hard. And that's not even all. Apart from that, Justin is one of those politicians who is made by and for the cameras. Always looking for the gesture, always making big promises of change, transformation, reinvention, and reconciliation. Always with the big grandiloquent words. And what's the problem with so much exposure and so many expectations? Well, it's very easy to start disappointing left and right. Precisely what has happened. For instance, in the end, the Indigenous people have accused him of using them only to win votes. And something similar has happened with his international policy. You see, Justin, who was born and raised in power circles, wanted Canada to play a starring role in international politics. And the truth, for years, he almost succeeded. However, some time ago, things started to go awry. The relationship with China fell apart following the arrest in Canada of Huawei executive Meng Wanzhou. And in India, another of this politician's big bets, it was a very similar story when Trudeau himself denounced the Modi government for planning to assassinate a Khalistani terrorist on Canadian soil. And let's see, maybe this is not something to criticize, but of course, the point is that Trudeau's good-natured policy meant that, in the end, when New Delhi and Beijing began to feel uncomfortable with Canada, they wanted to give him a slap on the wrist. They had the country in their sights, and not much respect for his government. You could say that Trudeau stepped right into the eye of the hurricane. And well, what am I going to tell you about Donald Trump? Trudeau was a great fit with Barack Obama, but not with the Make America Great Agains. And not because he didn't try, but the positions are irreconcilable. To the point that these days, Trump every now and then not only threatens Canada with new tariffs, but also raises the idea of Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States.
If Canada merged with the US, there would be no tariffs, taxes would go way down, and they would be totally secure from the threat of Russian and Chinese ships that are constantly surrounding them. Together, what a great nation it would be.
Which, beyond being absurd, is a blow to his government. It's a kind of humiliation to which Trudeau has not been able to respond this time.
Trump mocked Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as the governor of the great state of Canada.
Why could he not respond? Basically, as we have told you, because his political capital is already totally exhausted. VisualPolitik community, on the 10th of December, his Minister of Finance, one of the heavyweights of his government, resigned. From there began a real political torture, to the point that a vote of no confidence by the Parliament was considered likely. Perhaps that is what Trudeau wanted to avoid by bringing forward his resignation. And this is everything that explains the movements we have seen in the last few hours, and the announcement of this Prime Minister's departure. And the question is, what now? Well, his party, the Liberal Party, is floundering in the polls. And the truth, its political agenda is exhausted.
Whoever ascends to the leadership may well face snap elections, and there is a real risk that the party could fall to third or even fourth place. It also faces the stark choice between pivoting back towards the political center or cementing its alliance with the leftist NDP.
Of course, anything can happen, but it is foreseeable that now it will be the Conservatives who will take the helm. And what will this mean? Well, according to his promises, lower taxes and putting the government to work to regain national competitiveness. Exactly what Canadians want. Because beyond the social policies of this Prime Minister, the truth is that 2 out of 3 Canadians want taxes to go down. Check this out.
If the Conservatives prevail, you'll find a more pro-business, pro-resource extraction, smaller government, smaller spending, tougher on crime kind of a government.
It appears Justin Trudeau wanted to embody a new generation of politicians and a new bet, a sort of third way that would be able to combine a pro-market economy prosperity with a clear bet on very left-wing social policies. Whatever the case, that time has come to an end. Some are saying in Canada that if the House of Representatives votes against the government's budget measures next March, and Trudeau has not yet been replaced or formally withdrawn, the parliamentary vote could trigger an election, in which he would remain leader. Let's see, anything can happen, but the truth, with the numbers at hand, it doesn't seem feasible. Chances are that by now, Justin's political career has, purely and simply, come to an end. So the question is, what is your opinion of this controversial politician? How would you rate him from 1 to 10? Leave us your impressions in the comments and let's start a debate. Don't forget to like this video if you found it interesting and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. Thank you so very much for watching, all the best, and I will see you soon.